Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to the main event, the history of the Champions League. I'm Martin in the chair. As always, part 2 of our 4-part look at 2010-11. And we'll finish off the group stages this week with 4 more groups to look at. How are we, Adam Thornton?
Good, thank you. Yeah, I think, like we said, even though some of the group stages can seem a bit of a procession, there's some great games in here, and there's the starts of some interesting things. So yeah, unfortunately, we're probably going to start with Bayern Munich, but you can't have it all.
You can't. You just cannot. David, how are we doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, Bayern Munich and Josie. This is not an Adam week, as all of his favourites coming to play this week.
We'll start with Bayern then. Beaten finalists, no less, only a few months before. No huge changes, I don't think, Adam, in the squad. Germany had a very good World Cup. A lot of young players. We'll talk about a few of them, maybe ending up in the capital of Spain. But Bayern have a couple as well, of course. Just ticking over, went far away. No need to reinvent the wheel, kind of thing. And they do top the group.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. To be honest, they do well the year before. Obviously, very well finishing first in the Bundesliga, winning the cup, and then not unlucky by any means in the final, but getting to the final, I think was decent. This is Van Gaal's last season. He disappears after this. Not really too much of a change, like you said. I think there was a couple of little bits. Lucatoni, I think, was still there, but he'd been out on loan potentially the year before to Roma, actually, who are in this group. He'd been out on loan for a little bit, but he was there. That was another strange one for me, when we didn't really think of those Italian players as outside of when they sort of appeared in the Premier League, maybe a decade or so before. Someone like that going to Germany always felt a bit strange at the time, maybe similar to the Raul move. He was there for a bit, didn't really do very well, and they let him go this summer. They do okay. Mario Gomez is the man really just now, isn't he? And he will continue to be for a couple of years more, until Guardiola comes in, and he's very much not a Guardiola man at all. So doesn't make much of a surprise. But yeah, he's their main star at the minute. He scores a fair amount of goals for Bayern. And yeah, this is this interesting time, I think, for German football coming up, because they haven't really been anywhere internationally since Euro 96. They haven't really been anywhere, but they just start to appear again. And I think with all
the final of 2002, but it was they did the biz, but it was a run.
It was a functional thing rather than
it wasn't
basically, and
on its own.
Of course. Scored 1,000 goals against Saudi Arabia or something in their opening game. It was just but they defied expectations, I think, getting to that final. That it was not a great Germany team who had been hammered in Munich, of course, by England. But no, you're absolutely right. Not the greatest.
Is it maybe one of the last times? Not right now, but coming up, and we'll obviously talk about it. Maybe one of those last times where you've got a core of national team players who are also the core of a big domestic team as well. We're obviously seeing it as we discuss right now with Barcelona and Spain, and it's going to come to the fore a little bit over the next couple of years with Bayern Munich and Germany. But I can't think of anything since that. Everything just moves about too much. People move. There's so much variance, but I do always enjoy that when there's a core of national team players who are also playing for one of the domestic clubs. I think that continuity is key. So that will be my interesting point to note on Bayern over the next 3 or 4 years. My one and only interesting point, probably.
Fair enough. Roma join them, David. Again, spoken about them quite often. Francesco's still kicking a ball, but
of course,
too long left. Who else is in that side? Where are they? And yeah, I don't know how many seasons off the top of my head we've got of seeing Roma in the Champions League, to be honest.
Yeah, not a lot. Borriello's there. He's ably supporting him, as is Jeremy Menez. We call him the French.
Oh yeah,
he was a decent player. It's still built around the Totti, De Rossi duopoly, if you like. De Rossi policing back in the middle of the park. They brought in Philippe Mexes as well. One of those players that whenever you mention his name, people go, "Do you remember that overhead kick? Do you remember that goal?"
Yes.
He's one of these players who will be forever associated with one thing in his career. But they brought him in to try and stiffen up the defence, and they were a decent side. They weren't going to, I think, trouble the scorers. I don't think they had the depth for that. You get to a stage when you have players now, they're absolutely beloved, and we know this, both De Rossi and obviously Totti. There comes to a point with clubs where players are bigger than the team, and it becomes very difficult to make the whole better because you have to accommodate this player. You see, I think an example of it would be currently in international football with Portugal, where they have Cristiano Ronaldo, and you kind of think they would be better moving on to some of the younger strikers that they have. It was almost a prerequisite for any manager coming in there that whoever you bring in, whatever style you want to play, has to incorporate both of these players. Now, they were still very fine players, but it's a self-limiting thing, because you've got to build around that. They can't be unhappy. You have to manage towards them as well, as we know. But they'd stiffened up their spine to become a little bit more defensive solidly. They were still, as I say, quite reliant for goals. Borriello was an interesting player, though. I liked him. Adam, thoughts?
Yeah, one of those that I thought would potentially kick on more than he did, but I did find him quite interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I just, again, he was somebody that knew his role in the side, Martin, which was to play around Totti.
You need those guys, don't you? They're not going to compete.
No,
for the affections with a Francesco Totti. Every good team has someone like that who will do the running, will take whatever they can get. Basically,
you are the secondary guy. Yeah,
be the platform.
If you score 4 in a 5-0 win and he scores the 5th, he's getting the attention
and man of the match.
And man of the match and all the headlines, and you have to accept that. I think Borriello did that, and I think because of that, actually, it's interesting that I do wonder if players could be typecast into that role, because as Adam says, he doesn't go on and do anything. But, well, that's unfair. He doesn't go on and hit the heights that you maybe would have thought here that he was going to. And I wonder if part of that is you have subsumed yourself so much to playing around this superstar, this legend, this almost immovable club statue, that this legend that's already there, that when you then go to another club and they say, well, we paid money for you, we want you to be the main man. I wonder if you can go from being a supporting actor, and a very good one, to being the leading man, or whether or not
that's an interesting pod in itself, but I think at some point you are typecast as that. You are a character actor, and a very good one, and a very fine career as one. But I'm not sure after so long you're simply mentally able to make that leap. But I'd be very interested to hear the thoughts of listeners about someone who probably has done that, who's effectively done their apprenticeship, but
doesn't
stars are stars. You know what I mean? They're stars at 17 or whatever. Even if they're still raw, they carry themselves in a completely different way, because they fully expect to be at the centre of a club's orbit, whatever club that may be, whoever they go to throughout their career. And I don't know if people ever grow into that. I'm sure I'm missing some incredible examples, but
there will be. But I think the thing that makes it so interesting is clubs who, though, if a club has paid 10 million for you're Marco Borriello, and the club has paid 10 million for you, and they're saying to you, "Great, you're the guy now," and it's not just on the park, although that's the main thing. They don't want you to just come in and be a solid team player. They want you to be the star, and you're going to be the face of the club, and you're going to be the face of that era's team and whatnot. And suddenly you're being signed to do a job. It's strange, isn't it? You're being signed to do a job that you haven't actually done. And it's just this assumption that you're going to be able to do it. And I think this ties into our discussion that we've had previously about different types of managers. That there are managers of super clubs, there are managers of mid-table sides, there are managers who are relegation and promotion specialists. And I think with players, sometimes by experience, sometimes by character, they have a definitive role. And signing them and assuming that they can go and do this other role for you, I'm not necessarily sure is a sensible policy. It's a bit like, and we've talked about this a lot on this show, and we'll talk about it in the future. You know, you hire a manager. We talked about it last week, Benitez, to replace Mourinho. Well, what, does he fit what you need? No, but Ranić replacing Magath as Schalke, as we discussed. So it is, as you say, it's another pod on its own. But he was a guy who I think at this point you thought, well, he's going to go on and become a really terrific player for both club and country, and just never really did. But he had ability, but in this side he knew his role and he did it very well.
FC Basel and the wonderful Cluj making up the numbers in that group. A
young Sheridan Shaqiri.
Yes, indeed. Group F, Chelsea. Ancelotti's still there, of course. Title winner the season before. But, as we discussed, Mourinho and Inter doing a job very much on them in the quarterfinals. Maybe a wee bit surprising, given they've got loads of those names who had been part of that whole Chelsea thing since Abramovich took over, leaving Joe Cole, Ballack, Balletti, Deco, Carvalho, and they didn't do huge business in the summer. Like Ramirez was probably their biggest signing. They do, however, go big in the winter because they have a bad spell. They keep the pace for a wee bit, but it kind of goes off the rails. But 50 million on Fernando Torres, obviously in January, and I think David Luiz comes in that winter as well. So an interesting position that Chelsea are in. Ancelotti won't see next season, he'll go, but no issues in this group, as again is just becoming the norm. For one of these big seeds not to make it is an absolute shocker.
Yeah, that would be. It's funny that you mentioned there are still a lot of players here from that era. It's maybe two of the newer ones. I say newer as in a couple of years that are actually, for me, they're best two. Certainly Anelka gets a goal every. He doesn't score a goal every game. He scores 6 goals in 6 games, if that makes sense to anyone. And Malouda, I think, he was again maybe I was a little bit maybe left him out. He was one of these sort of newer style, shall we say, wingers coming through. He'd obviously been there at Lyon for fair number of years when they were doing their stuff, and he was a guy that came in maybe in that sort of mold that we remember from Chelsea 6-7 years before, that someone who's coming in without really a huge amount of fanfare. Maybe takes a while. If I remember rightly, he took a long while to get going potentially. At Chelsea, he was I think these were far and away his best 2 seasons. That the one before and then this one at Chelsea. So yeah, I think it's one of these moments looking back. It was almost like a bit of a halfway house. Obviously, we know what's coming up in the not too distant future. Ancelotti, to me, did well, but sort of always felt maybe this is not fair at all, but it did almost feel like a little bit of a holding the fort type of thing with Ancelotti. So yeah, no trouble at all for them through with almost a perfect record, wasn't it? I think they only lost
one defeat at the very end. I think
game,
in Marseille. We've just been doing so many of these shows, but when it comes to groups, there's just clubs that seem to be paired all the time. In Chelsea, Marseille, Spartak Moscow, Žilina. I think possibly their first. I can't remember speaking too often about them on this show, but 0 points. Thanks for your time, lads. And on the way, but yeah, Chelsea and Marseille through in the end. Group G then. I mean, Puro's there. You turn up at Neon for the draw. Looking forward to this, and on paper anyway, a gigantic test ahead, because 3 European heavyweights, Real Madrid, Milan and Ajax. Right then, David, Mourinho leaves Milan for Madrid, the biggest story of the summer, and he does a fair bit of business on the way. His old pal, Ricardo Carvalho, some age by this point, but your trusted lieutenants and all of that come from Chelsea for €8 million or something. But a few players who really had lit up the World Cup. Angel Di Maria from Argentina, of course, but Sami Khedira and Mesut Ozil from that young, very vibrant, very impressive Germany side, in addition to the players who are already there, Cristiano Ronaldo, of course, Higuain, Benzema, Ramos, Casillas, blah, 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 blah. Everything just seems set up for the next one, the next big success. And you look at that Champions League group, again, huge names, Milan, Ajax, Auxerre, 1 draw, 5 wins. Certainly looks to be heading that way. But in between that, I'm sure, is the 5-0 humbling in the new camp. And early signs, perhaps, that he might not actually be suited to all these kind of megastars who might not jump through the hoops that others have done in the past.
There was an interesting interview at the time with a Spanish journalist that I recall very vividly, and he was asked about it. And it's interesting, you've named those signings, Martin, and they're quite interesting signings, but the journalist was sort of at pains to say Real Madrid are saying that they're not bringing in, the superstar player, the Ronaldo type, this summer, because they've done that with the coach. And looking back, that's quite interesting. We've got the superstar coach now. He knew he was a George Mendes client, so he understood that the only other person in the firmament that he had to play ball with was Ronaldo, basically. He knew that. So there wasn't really any issue there, and there wasn't going to, I didn't sign you. He knew the deal there at that club. Similarly with Karim Benzema, who was always Florentino Perez's boy. You did not mess with him. I have to admit, this is a show where we get to do hindsight, but I try occasionally to put myself into the position of, or remember my views when this was going on. That summer, I just thought, well, it's inevitable. You've got Ronaldo, you've got Mourinho, he will go and be a success there. He's always a success. Look what he did at Inter, for crying out loud. So I have to admit, and I remember watching that 5-0 game, staggered, absolutely staggered by how modern and vibrant that Barcelona side looked and how tired and predictable, despite these players that you mentioned there. I don't want to say uncoached Real Madrid looked, but they looked basic. And a good side can make you look like that, of course. But that was, I think, a jolt for everyone. And, of course, for Mourinho as well. We're here though to talk about this group stage. They ease through it. They absolutely do. They have no issues whatsoever. Milan have done at the time, what was the guarantee? If you want to go out and win Scudettos, you bring in Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And he was, it was almost as close to a guarantee as you could possibly get at that time. They are a good side. There's some notable names in the Ajax squad at the time. A talented young South American called Luiz Suarez. Mentioned the last show. There's something about Danes at Ajax. There's always something about a South American at one of the Dutch big three, isn't there? And of course he was, exactly, Ronaldo. He was starting to get noticed, and there was a lot of talk. It was actually a lot of talk about Manchester United, which is odd now, given that he went on to do what he did at Liverpool. But there was a lot of talk about Manchester United. But
so he came in that window, didn't he? That winter when Torres left.
He did, yeah. Torres went and they bought him and Andy Carroll. Yeah, they bought him and Andy Carroll. Yes. That's how they spent the money. Basically, it was 35 for Carroll and 22. They got 50 and they spent 57 on those two. And to be honest, Suarez went off like a trick. Maybe slightly helped by the fact, Martin, that everyone was looking at Andy Carroll. You can just get on with it. The pressure isn't quite as much on you. But he went off like a train at Liverpool and never let up. But yeah, I have to admit, I thought that this Madrid side, Mourinho was in place because they brought in Ronaldo, and that was supposed to be the one, wasn't it? That was Ronaldo is here, Decima's on the way, kind of thing. And the fact that it hadn't, I then thought, well, they've done it now. They've brought in Jose. He was at the absolute peak of his powers. He'd come to. People might point to when he went to Chelsea or his first couple of years at Chelsea. I would disagree with that because I think once you've come through the first storm, which he had now done, gone to another club again and proved that it was now, well, he's done it at Porto, he's done it at Chelsea, he's done it at Inter, he's just...
And it's in leagues, it's in different countries, a different environment, so it's absolutely right. Adam, hindsight, we know what happens and probably a lot of writing on the wall, how he asks players to perform, his chip in the shoulder style does not work at Real Madrid. But there was never any question of him turning that down and them not offering it. It was a deal that had to be done. I can't see any way in the summer of 2010 that isn't happening, given where he was and where they were at that time. The one thing that stood out for me wasn't the Nou Camp game, because these things happen. We know what derbies can be like, and you can win big, you can lose big, and they can be freaks. He hadn't lost a home game for about 1,000,000 years, and they lost to Sporting Gijón, I think, in April, and that was the kind of first sign to me that maybe some of the shine is going to be reduced at this weird, wonderful club, but with its own idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, and I think this is probably what I was trying to get to. The point I was trying to make towards the end of the last season's pods is I don't think he's taken this job to become the Real Madrid manager. If I know he is literally, but I think he's completely stung by the Barcelona rejection, and it's taken a job for revenge purposes. And I guess that's what I was going with in terms of pious is the wrong word, because we sort of think of that in terms of the Barcelona model, and this is the right way to do things. But I guess by virtue of being completely opposite to that, you're as zealot in the other way as you think. So I think he's taken that job as a sort of revenge mission. You could argue the season after he absolutely does get that, but so I think we spoke about this before, didn't we? Way back with Arsene Wenger, I think, when you double down or triple down into that negative mindset of, in Wenger's case, we don't have the money, we're not good enough, we can't compete toe to toe in a way that this club should. It's just a really difficult mindset to get out of, and if the manager's got that mindset, that's fair enough. There is no way in hell Real Madrid fans, support, or anyone in that club is going to have that mindset. They won't accept the whole little horses rubbish that he brings out at Chelsea later on in terms of where they are. You just can't do it at Real Madrid. There's no way that you can dial down expectations in that way. Now, he maybe doesn't do that, but I think he does it on the pitch with some of the stuff that he does. You only need to look at some of the players that you mentioned there in terms of maybe Sami Khedira coming in. Those type of guys being the main man in your midfield, if you want to call it that, it is a very defensive situation. And yeah, I think he goes too far, I think I would say, and it becomes, instead of pressing high up the pitch and forcing the opposition back, etc., it does very quickly, I think, turn into histrionics and stop and play and diving and roughhousing and going down theatrically and doing all these things to disrupt an opposition rather than disrupt an opposition in the way that he's maybe done the year before, for example, at Inter Milan. So yeah, it's a really interesting period that we're coming to for Madrid, and it just feels at odds to pretty much everything else in their history that you know about.
Yeah, I think revenge is it, Adam. I think you're spot on there, because that is what he's out to seek, and it is bitterness and it is hatred. Those are words that don't go hand in hand with piety. They're above all that. The pious, he is down and dirty, and the little horses thing is an interesting thing as well, because early Chelsea, he wasn't like that. He literally said we're going to win the league the minute he came. To them, not outwardly, and I do wonder how this experience in Madrid did shift him. Mesut Ozil's an interesting one, because I think he had so much faith, belief, hope around him, maybe doing what Schneider had done for him, possibly, and he just wouldn't play ball.
Yeah.
Just would not play ball, and almost as a signal that a new generation of players are different.
Couldn't agree more. Type of player. If you're profiling,
that.
If you're profiling type of player, I can certainly see them being in the same ballpark as that new style number 10 that is very, very at home in this 4-2-3-1 that is coming out with the inverted wingers and all that sort of stuff. So I can absolutely see it. But the different aspect for me there is Ozil doesn't have any of Schneider's typically Dutch arrogance, callousness, all that sort of stuff. He's a bit more timid, reserved, all that sort of stuff, which I think would probably definitely impact his career. He didn't have that. He's done a lot. He achieved a lot, but did he have that sort of single-mindedness and desire to go on and be one of the
I think it wound Mourinho up the back.
It did.
He could cope with that. Said, why are you not doing what you should be doing? You're brilliant. Why are you not starving the way that these other players are starving? And you'd rather be in the shower than out cold, getting dirty and working hard. And I think that typified, I think, what maybe goes wrong in Madrid. Well, goes wrong in terms of the Champions League. We'll have to touch on a few things next season, maybe domestically, as part of that story. But just what goes wrong with his career, this new breed of footballers who just could not get into his way of thinking. Adam, I seem to ask you this about Leon. I seem to ask you a lot about Milan. Where are they at the moment? Because I do have a soft spot for them, and they were very much on top of the world when we started this. They do go up, of course, or go through up with Real Madrid. Half the points, it must be said. Real Madrid is 16 points, Milan of 8. Heavily reliant on Zlatan.
Yes, I don't think there's any doubt about that. They have a lot of firepower this year. They've got Pato, we mentioned last year. Robinho has left Manchester City and comes to Milan. This is his first season, I think, and his best. I can't say the full name, Max Allegri, is here. He doesn't quite have that reputation at the minute. David, you'll hopefully agree with this.
Yes,
I think
definitely.
he just becomes tied to. He doesn't have the reputation he's got now, which is a bit of a dinosaur. But even at Juventus, he just became tied to the Juventus bastardry, as you would over that sort of 10 years.
It's almost hard to remember a time when he was seen as, you're absolutely right, as a sort of young, aggressive, progressive, a dynamic, modern coach, because you're right, he went to Juventus, and that's a hard environment, incidentally, to thrive in. It's a singular one, and you have to adapt to do it. But he then became a dinosaur. That's pretty quickly as well. I mean, has there ever been a coach at that level who's gone from, being seen where he was, as we're talking about now, to 5 years later being seen as, you know what you're getting from it, but he's kind of old and, dull and safe.
I think, considering how dominant Juventus were, obviously coming into this era, not far off in terms of how dominant they were when he went back to Juventus in 2021. I think they were all dead against it. They were like, we do not want this. We don't want him here at all. He was a remnant of the past, if you like, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves there, I guess. I think this Milan team, like I said, there's a lot of firepower there. They have a really interesting spell, I guess, at this point, because, like you said, Martin, Ibrahimovic is here at the minute. I think he has a point to prove, 100%. He really, really does, because as much as he would never admit that it was his fault or anything, the Barcelona thing doesn't work at all. We've discussed that. They do still have a decent defence, shall we say, and I say decent because they've obviously got Alessandro Nesta, who's still got a couple of seasons left in him, and then Thiago Silva has joined them the year before, maybe. He's only there for a couple of years. I always remember, for me, and I thought Thiago Silva was at Milan for, again, this is maybe how much attention I paid to the whole PSG run, but I would have had it the other way around, that he was at Milan for a lot longer than he was at PSG, but I don't think it was the case. He's only there for a few years and he moves off. So they've got a decent defence, but it's kind of all about that attack that they've got and their midfield. Mark Van Bommel, Clarence Seedorf is
still going
there, which is unbelievable, really, when you think about it. He's still there. What is he at this time? He must be 30, 35 plus, I think, at this time. And you've got Gattuso, obviously, as well, who's there and probably isn't. Maybe a couple of years younger, but not far off it. So that midfield that felt like it was maybe on its last legs when we spoke about it before with your Ambrosinis and things. There's still a couple of them there. And of course, someone who I think we might have spoken about more than most Italian strikers here. Pippo Inzaghi pops up with another couple of goals in the group stages. Just a nice little bookend. He's again got another year or so. It's a bit of a proper changing of the guard that it feels like we've been talking about for ages. Kind of happens at the tail end of 2012 season when most of those players that I've discussed there move on and they sort of move into a new and not very successful period.
Just before we leave them, were they winners of the league?
I think so this year. I really think so. There is still this Calciopoli hangover, as much as they want to be free of it and things. Inter Milan, as we know, dominated for a bit. The whole Benitez thing probably cost them. I would say, like I mentioned, they did battle through when Leonardo inexplicably became their manager for 6 months after leaving Milan, and before I think he goes to PSG in the summer and becomes a director of football. A weird season that was for him, going from Milan manager to Inter Milan manager to PSG director of football. But I think it's difficult to say, isn't it? If he'd been there for the full season, what might have been different, you don't really know. But I definitely think the whole Benitez experiment, and as we mentioned, last week, moving from that whole Mourinho run through brick walls to someone who wants to know what time you're going to bed at night and wants to know what you've been eating down to the 15th M&M or whatever. It's a bit of a, despite the styles being similar, it's a completely different way of treating players and philosophy and man management and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think if that hadn't have happened, for example, I think if Mourinho's there, they win the league, no bother at all. So it's one of those ones. How good is the achievement when the other team kind of collapses quite badly for the first 6 months? But yeah, I would say overall, they were certainly worthy of it. Yeah.
Okay, final group. David, our old friends, Arsenal, doing very Arsenal things. They win the first game 6-0. They go away from home and win 3-1. Of
course they do.
They win the third game 5-1, and they go through in second place, 3 whole points behind the winners. In the league, Manchester United win the league, but I mean, Arsenal are a point behind United in like February, at the end of February. So, that's when you just start, obviously, to turn into the final stretch. You can see the finishing line in the distance. They're a point behind, and they win one league game in March and April. It's just who they are at this time. They brought Koscielny in, Marwan Shamak is in. We've got all we've got all the favourites there. Fabregas obviously still there. Xavi, Jack Wilshere coming through still. Nasri, Van Persie, all the lads. But it's Shakhtar. It's Shakhtar Donetsk who win the group. And the man who scores the goal in Donetsk to beat Arsenal is Eduardo, of course, who former Arsenal player until that horror tackle. It just seems so typical of what we've kind of come to know of them in this particular period of time, which is now stretching into a decade.
It's a while, yeah. This is so on brand for Arsenal that when they are good, they are absolutely irresistible. The football they play is magnificent, and teams cannot live with it. They move the ball so quickly, the passing movements, and it was beautiful to watch. But you've just named a shed load of brilliant attacking players, Martin. Wonderful footballers. The issue, this was back in the day. I bet you trigger a memory for both of you here. Why don't they sign a midfielder, a holding midfielder? That was the shout all the time. Why wouldn't he go out and buy? I said, and then it was a centre half. But as Martin said, they bought centre halves. They've got, like we've just mentioned, 3 that came in that summer. It was what they meant as they needed a Sol Campbell, and they didn't have one. And they needed an Emmanuel Petit or a Patrick Vieira, and they didn't have one. And I think that those are legitimate shouts. Whether or not Wenger felt that those type of players in this team just wouldn't work, they didn't fit the identity, and they would have been kind of playing against type, I do admit. The problem with this Arsenal side is it got a reputation, possibly fairly, possibly unfairly, but you did just mention a collapse there, Martin. There's no other way to describe it. For being a bit of a soft touch, being a cup side, being a side who, on their day, and to be fair to them, they had more days than they didn't, were fantastic. But when push came to shove, that they could be gotten at. And that there was a sort of sense that, Manchester United or Chelsea, if it came down to a straight shootout of them versus Arsenal for a title, they were going to win. Because they were just, almost more grown up, more adult about things, less dogmatic. And Wenger was certainly dogmatic. But some of these performances, even in this group stage we're discussing, they were absolutely electric. The football was just wonderful, and sides were getting taken apart. And some of the goals, if you go back and watch the goals from this group stage, some of the goals they're scoring are as good as you'll see. But is it as simple as they lack that steeliness? Can you graft in to a side like this? Can you graft in 2 or 3 players who maybe aren't as good passers as the ball? But do you need that if you have Fabregas, who's got Nasri in front of him, or Xavi?
This is the fallacy, though, David, right? when you look at a glory period of a club, you single out, right, okay, what we're lacking? We're lacking steel. Who's the hardest guy in there? Campbell or Vieira? You need another one of those. But this is the problem. It wasn't two hard men and
9 players.
eight other artists. Bergkamp was tough. Henry was physically tough. Like they had presence.
Guys like Lauren and
absolutely
no, right. Hard guy, Gilberto Silva. 6'4" and built like a tank. Even the likes of Pires, he didn't mind getting involved. When it got rough. No, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it is as binary as they needed this, they didn't have it. I can understand why Wenger, being as close to it as he was, in one sense, in watching it, I can understand because they did always look as though they were just a little off doing it, but doing it in such a way that was beautiful. I think from the outside, it was easier to tell, you're actually lacking certain qualities that you need to go and win a title or whatever. But from Wenger's point of view, they've come through the winter. You mentioned that there. The collapse comes late in the season. It's not when you might expect traditionally, can they go to Stoke? That was always the thing. But, traditionally, they've come through that period. There's loads of games and there's, the pitches are always good now. That's a myth. But, it's cold and it's wet. I can understand why he got caught up in it. And at times it was wonderful. It was genuinely beautiful. But there is something about this group or something about, I think, that's almost so beautifully totemic of this Arsenal side, which is there's a 6-0 in there where they were sensational. There's a 5-1. There's other big goal-scoring victories and they don't win the group. And in the end, there's something about that, I think, that's very fitting.
Just one thing before we go, Adam, the team that is third in this group goes to the Europa League instead. Had to come through 2 qualifiers, beat Celtic, beat Sevilla on the way, and it's FC Braga who will take up that third spot and run with it all the way to that Europa League final that year, where they lose to another Portuguese side, of course, Porto.
Yeah, and this is a funny one as well, because it feels like Braga appear a bit later than this, and it doesn't really feel like a Champions League thing. So I was kind of surprised to see them. I guess it's a really good run. They've got a few players in there that we might know of. Helder Barbosa was one that I maybe just remember from Football Manager potentially. At Porto a while back as a kind of left winger. Nothing major really. Hugo Baiana, who I think is now is he the Man City director of football? He's going to be
technical director. Yes, you're correct.
He had a little spell on loan there when he was at Valencia. So yeah, one of those ones that are interesting to pop up and keep an eye on. I completely missed their run, as you mentioned there. It's so funny. We were speaking about teams that just seem to play each other all the time. I could swear Arsenal and Shakhtar played each other 7 years in a row, probably.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's such a quirk of things. But yeah, it's a very Arsenal group, that one. Maybe that Arsenal Shakhtar is the point there, but it just feels like one of those groups that I remember there always been a bit of a chat maybe about Man United getting, it was more the cups, wasn't it, in England, that they always seem to get a home tie or an easy tie, if you like. Arsenal, it'd be interesting because they kind of struck. There was never I don't remember them getting a kind of Ajax, Milan, Madrid type group, even though they're hanging on in 4th place, when you actually think some of those things would be more likely. It always seems to be one of those groups that they'd have to really, really combust to not get out of.
All right, boys, that'll do us for the groups of 2010-11. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Cheers, David.
Pleasure as always, guys. Thank you very much.
And we're into the knockouts, of course, next week. Plenty of goals, couple of surprises, and Joe Jordan versus Rino Gattuso. Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.